Kids were fatally shot, yet they were unarmed. And Mkhwanazi planted evidence, or had evidence planted to cover up what had actually happened. I later realized this meant we would be killing criminals instead of arresting them. Many times during our missions, no arrests were ever made of any suspects, and a lot of the time the suspect or civilians were shot in the back as if they were running away. We would often, quote unquote, shoot to kill. When we noticed that 6 teenagers had been shot and killed, we knew there would be trouble. Mkhwanazi came to the scene and 9mm weapons with dead teenagers, and some weapons were left next to their bodies. So it could be said that these kids shot at us. They would remove evidence of us, the task him ever being there or planting evidence to change the narrative. We were all promised that after we had been doing this work for 5 years, we would each receive 5 million rand in cash. If we can just move to the allegations you make in relation to the PKTT.
Can I get the paragraph number?
In 62. Sorry. Paragraph 62. In paragraph 62, you allege, or you say in your affidavit, during his testimony both at Matlanga and at the ad hoc committee of Parliament, Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi remained totally silent about the rampant criminal activity within the PKTT. In that regard, I've been anonymously supplied with the following copies of 4 sworn statements by Sergeant Mokoena, dated 16 September 2024, Captain, I don't know if it's Oor, dated 30 September 2024, Lieutenant Colonel Khumalo, dated 24 August 2024, and Constable Ndlovu, dated 9 October. And these affidavits are annexed. It's at pages 270, 272, 274, and 276. Do you want to highlight, again, it can be taken as read. Do you want to highlight one of those specific affidavits?
Well, there's 4 statements there, Chairman. I would say the most compelling statement is the statement of Lieutenant Colonel Khumalo, who admits to having received...
Just the page reference?
Page 274.
274, okay. Yes.
He admits to having received 10,000 rand from a person by the name of Plakis. And Plakis was the head of security at the university.
So all 4 of these affidavits relate to the PKTT Fort Hare, University of Fort Hare investigation.
That is correct.
Yeah.
And the person within University of Fort Hare...
Can continue?
The person within University of Fort Hare that the PKTT was liaising with, they had been instructed to liaise with this person, was a person by the name of Plak. And all of them admitted receiving gratification as defined in Act 12 of 2004. And in particular, the leader of this team, this small team, was this Lieutenant Colonel Khumalo, who admitted receiving 10,000 rand, allegedly for purchase of honey, because apparently Colonel Khumalo was selling honey. And Plakis bought 60 bottles, but he paid for 150 bottles of honey. And no honey was delivered to him. And in fact, the money wasn't refunded, which meant Colonel Khumalo received 10,000 rand gratification.
Okay, then can I just refer you to
And Plaatjes was subsequently arrested and charged. He, in fact, was the main suspect.
I think that's common knowledge. Can I just refer you to paragraph, it's section J of your affidavit, paragraph 96.
Section J. What's
Yeah.
the page number?
It's page 32. Allegations of state-sponsored heat squads at work in KZN. And then,
Page 32.
yeah, you say that in the week following General Nkosazana's media conference, Forensic for Justice were approached by an informer.
That's correct.
This informer made shocking allegations. As a result, the informer was interviewed over several days and a sworn statement taken from him. To protect the identity of this informer, I've redacted his sworn statement. I've also redacted the transcript of the main interview. You say unredacted versions will be made available to the Commission of Inquiry, and you attach the statement, and it's J638 to 634. So can you go to 638 and 6? (638) and it goes to 644.
Yes. I'm there.
Yeah. And there the deponent, whose name is redacted, says in paragraph 3, on 8 July 2025, following the allegations made by Lieutenant General Nhlanhla Lakim Nkosazana in a national media briefing on the 6th of July, I decided to call Mr. Paul O'Sullivan of Forensics for Justice. The reason I reached out to Mr. O'Sullivan was because I knew of Mr. O'Sullivan and his prior investigations into corrupt police officials. I'm sick of what I'm taking part in, and I desperately want to get out, and I'm fearful that if I leave on my own, I will be killed. To silence me because I know too much. And then in and around 2019, when I was around the age is deleted, I was approached by a tall black Zulu man who seemed to be in his early 70s, whom I called Baba Ndlovu, approached me. Ndlovu and Nkosazana both reside in Pietermaritzburg. I was informed by Nkosazana that Nkosazana was looking for a bright young man whom he could train to be what was referred to as an arm of the police service. I understood this to mean that we would be trained to support services to the police. Paragraph 6, I, along with at least 40 other young black males, took part in rigorous training for approximately 7 months. We were told that we would not be paid for our time while training, but we were guaranteed work when the training was over. Paragraph 8, when the training was over, we were all given 50,000 rand in cash by Mr. Mthethwa and told to return home and await further instructions. A week or two after being back home, I received a phone call from Mthethwa. He told me to collect a package. Upon my arrival, I would meet some man. I never knew his name, but he knew who I was and what I looked like, and he handed me a further 50,000 rand cash, which was held together by an elastic band. A few weeks later, I received another 20,000 rand in cash in the same manner. In total, I received after the training was therefore 120,000 rand. Paragraph 9. In and around the end of 2019, early 2020, there was civil unrest in KwaDukuza, KZN, and I received a phone call from Tetwa telling me to go to the same meeting spot. I was collected by prior arrangement by a bus, and the driver was the same man who would hand me the cash every time. We were transported to a meeting spot near the Rainbow Chicken Farm in Hammersdale. By the time of our arrival, there were about 19 or 20 of us in the bus. We were all given suit bags with our names on it, with blue SAPS uniform inside them. The SAPS uniform didn't have any ranks on them and nor our names on the pocket, but they look exactly like blue SAPS uniforms. Later on, and in our time with the task team, our SAPS uniforms were given rank badges. None of us were actual police officers or SAPS members. Paragraph 10, the first mission in KwaDukuza was crowd control mission, where we were told to fire rubber bullets at a crowd of people that were protesting. Then I skip a few lines. It was made clear to me and the other members of the task team, our main purpose, according to Mkhwanazi, was to, quote, clean the streets, unquote. I later realized this meant we would be killing criminals instead of arresting them. Paragraph 11, in about mid-2022, there was a mission which I referred to as the West Boys drug bust. We were told that we would be required to do a quote-unquote drug bust. And when we arrived at the location, the so-called drug lab in Umlazi, a shootout ensued between us, who was described by him as an extrajudicial task team, real legitimate police officers and the suspects. It ended with at least 15 suspects being shot dead. Many times during our missions, no arrests were ever made of any suspects, and a lot of the time the suspect or civilians were shot in the back as if they were running away. We would often, quote unquote, shoot to kill. The next mission in paragraph 12, I'll speak about in around August 2024 in section 8, Umlazi. We were told by Mtetwa there was an abandoned house in section 8, Umlazi, where people were using the abandoned house for a drug syndicate and we needed to get rid of them. I understood this to mean they were dangerous and we needed to eliminate them. When we arrived, we split into two groups and went in kicking the doors front and back and immediately shot everyone inside. Paragraph 13, when we noticed that 6 teenagers had been shot and killed, we knew there would be trouble. Ndlovu phoned Mkhwanazi to come to the scene. Just before Mkhwanazi came to the scene, we were told by Ndlovu that some of us had to leave, and 9mm weapons with dead teenagers and some weapons were left next to their bodies. So it could be said that these kids shot at us. This is the second mission where kids were fatally shot, yet they were unarmed. And Mkhwanazi planted evidence or had evidence planted to cover up what had actually happened. I was not involved in the first incidents. It must have been one of the other groups. I also wish to mention that Mkhwanazi always arrived at these missions with other police officers to basically clean up the mess, quote unquote, which either meant that they would remove evidence of us, the task team ever being there or planting evidence to change the narrative. The last sentence in that paragraph, none of us had firearm licenses for the weapons we were using, Wilson police uniform. Then lastly, paragraph 16, whilst working for the task team, I received 20,000 Rand in cash per month. Considering there were at least 3 or 4 groups or task teams, each receiving 20,000 Rand in cash. This would mean that the total cash payment made of all these members in the task team was between 1.2 million and 1.6 million per month. It seems to me there were 3 groups of 20 people, none of them cops. We were all promised that after we had been doing this work for 5 years, we would each receive 5 million rand in cash. What is these allegations clearly very serious? What's happened to this? Has a case been opened? Is it being investigated? What's the status of these allegations?
Chairman, we supplied a copy of this. In fact, no, we supplied the original of this in terms of Section 27 of the NPA Act to IDAC. And we supplied a copy of this to a senior investigator who works for IPID and is based in KZN. And we have left them to get on with it. So we would have probably pursued it a bit further, but given the fact that I was being accused of having captured IPID and having captured the NPA and having run the country, we decided just to file these complaints and leave them to get on with it. So I don't know what's been done about it.
Okay. When is the last time that you made any follow-up or inquiries?
In August last year.
And this person who deposed to this affidavit came to you, approached you.
Yeah, we didn't know him from a bar of soap. In fact, we have a toll-free number. It's 0800 118 118. And that's the toll-free number for Forensics for Justice. And it's an unmanned phone, but people phone and leave messages. And he phoned there, and we've got a tape recording of that as well. And he phoned there and said that he wanted an urgent meeting. And then I spoke to him on the phone, and I tape recorded that as well. And in the tape recording, he said that he was involved in killing people, and it was getting to his conscience. And him and another person wanted to come and see me. So I met with him first, and the other person was supposed to see me afterwards, but the other person allegedly shot and killed himself the day before he was supposed to come and see me, which only left this person. So that's why I've redacted everything that can be used to identify his name.
Do you know where this person is or what the whereabouts, given?
Yes, we do. And we've passed that information on. So unredacted version of this is with IDAC, the original of it. And if you have a look, Chairman, there's a whole interview of 60 or 70 pages from page 644 right through to page 790 is the transcript. It's a redacted transcript because some of the things he says in there clearly
of your interview.
Yes, and it was like a 4-hour interview over a long period of time. I think we stopped and then we carried on again.
And who was with you when you conducted the interview?
The person that was with me, that name has been redacted. One of my staff from Forensics for Justice and a person who I call Peter Piper, because I wanted somebody that wasn't involved with Forensics for Justice to be present.
Okay.
So I just call that person Peter Piper, but that's not his real name.
Right.
And that person was present, and that person's a Zulu-speaking individual because the person we were interviewing spoke English quite well, actually, but he knew, the person that was with us knows about these areas in KZN, so he was able to ask questions about this and that and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah. Our time is really now limited. And to deal with the slush fund, the Secret Service account, which, as I mentioned, it's dealt with by you in the part which is headed the slush fund, the Secret Service account.
What's the paragraph number?
It's from paragraph 64 onwards.
Okay. So
and we've also heard some evidence obviously the extent to which we accept it as evidence corroborated and confirmed of Mr. Shlingwani. But you make several allegations about General Mkunazi and his alleged conduct regarding the slush fund. You raise questions about it, about crime intelligence, involvement in operational functions, and so on, at paragraph 80.
Yeah. So, Chairman, during its testimony at the Madlanga Commission and at this ad hoc committee, General Mkunazi repeatedly talked about informers that were supplying him with information. Now, it's not the function of somebody that doesn't have security clearance to manage informers. And General Mkunazi had no security clearance. Plus, he wasn't working in crime intelligence. It's a function of crime intelligence to manage informers. And that is the purpose of the slush fund. The slush fund, actually, its real name is the Secret Service account. And that money is supposed to be used to pay the informers to get information pertaining to criminal activity. And then if the information is good and it results in arrests, the informers get paid. Now, what I couldn't understand is how General Mkunazi was able to claim at the Madlanga Commission and in Parliament that he was managing informers. And I have made the suggestion at paragraph 81, Chairman, that if the committee wants to get to the bottom of the root of all evil in the police, it needs to start with the slush fund. Because if they can stop the wanton theft of millions of rand, which is stolen in secret and spent in secret with zero accountability, and in fact, the loose strings around the purse of the slush fund results in inside factional battles within the police, because many senior police officials want to get their hands on these taxpayer funds. And it's a fact of life that in 2012-2013 financial year, the slush fund budget was 98 million rand a year. In the 13 years since then, it's grown to 600 million rand a year, which is a 500% increase. During the same period, Chairman, we've had inflation of 113%. So we have not seen a concomitant drop in serious crime. In fact, we've seen the opposite. We've seen crime increase in the last 13 years.
Okay, there's just another two topics I need to cover with you quickly. The one is the now infamous, notorious braai that you had at what used to be Kretsch's house. What was that gathering? Did you conspire there? Who was there? Did you conspire there to do anything, to frame anyone?
No, Chairman, I was
anyone?
in fact flying overseas. I was flying to Vienna on the night of that braai. And it was the end of the year. The people that are stated to be at the braai by Nkabindi and General Mokateri. So Cedric Nkabindi was not invited to the braai, but he turned up. The persons that were invited to the braai, and it was just an informal braai of 2 hours, was Robert McBride, General Sabia, who by that stage was no longer in the police. He was, I think, working for the Johannesburg City Council. And there were some of my staff there. And the late Mandla Mashlangu was there, and there was a journalist there, but the journalist was there to talk about a new book that she'd just published about Radovan Krejcir. And that's why we decided to have the braai at Radovan Krejcir's house, because she was launching the book that she'd written about Radovan Krejcir. And I asked the person who owned the house if we could have a braai there. And that's what we did.
And what did you discuss? Was it just an end of year braai? Was it just a social gathering, or did you meet for any particular purpose?
It was a 2-hour social gathering, and I was quite surprised to see the number of people that turned up, because from IPID there were probably 6 or 7. I invited Mandla Mashlangu, the late Mandla Mashlangu, and I invited Robert McBride. I invited Matthew Sissoko, but he didn't come. And there were 1 or 2 others, but I can't remember their names now, plus Cedric Nkubindi. And actually, if things that had happened afterwards hadn't have happened, I wouldn't have even remembered Cedric Nkubindi's name. He alleged that there were people there from AfriForum and the DA. There were nobody there from AfriForum, and there were nobody there from the DA. So all these things were fabricated. He also alleged...
Any journalists there?
Angelique Serrao. She made a book about, or she published a book then, that same week, about Radovan Krejcir. So, and she gave everybody a copy of the book. So that was now your house. You bought it from Krejcir. No, it wasn't my house.
Is it Krejcir's house?
No, it was never Radovan Krejcir's house. So I don't really know.
Okay.
You know, there's a whole fabrication that it was Radovan Krejcir's house. It was never Radovan Krejcir's house. The house in question is owned by a company, and the owner of that company, I asked him, can we use the house? Radovan Krejcir used to live there.
Oh, I see. Okay. Now,